In today's video, we're going to be having a look at two different methods for adding Switchbot devices to HomeAssistant, as well as a couple of energy-saving automations using those devices. Check it out. What's going on, guys? I hope you're all doing well. The first method that we're going to be looking at for getting the Switchbot devices into HomeAssistant is nice and simple and just uses a HomeAssistant workflow. But the second method is a bit more hands-on and it's going to be a DIY approach. But as always, this video will be chaptered, so if there's a specific one that you want to look at, be sure to make use of those chapters in the description below. Hey, Mark from the future here. Just to quickly jump in on this video, as of update 2022.9 for HomeAssistant, there is now more support for Switchbot devices. So devices that previously weren't supported, like the motion sensor and the meter, those are now supported with the standard Switchbot integration. And just to kind of clarify a bit of the difference between these two different methods that we're going to look at today, this first method uses the standard integration and it's by far the simplest to set up, but this second method is more of a DIY approach where you're going to set up an ESP, and the reason you may want to opt for that one is to get more access to sensors and information that you don't get with the standard integration. And it also allows you to place that ESP anywhere in your home. So if your HomeAssistant happens to be in your basement or your cellar, or it's tucked away in a corner, you're going to be able to place this ESP to get a better range across your whole home. So now you know those things, enjoy the rest of the video. Thank you to Switchbot for sponsoring today's video. Switchbot have teamed up with IFT on IFT's Energy Challenge to help them save as much money as possible. If you haven't already seen the challenge, you'll find a link to it in the description below, as well as a link to a previous video that I've done for the Energy Challenge that will show you 5 different products that you can use to save money in your smart homes. There's also a link to the Energy Challenge playlist, which will contain a bunch of videos from a lot of the smart home YouTubers that you all know and love. Switchbot create a bunch of different smart home products, but what is interesting about their products is usually they contain some extra features that you wouldn't usually find in a device of that type. Take the contact sensor for example. A traditional contact sensor will tell you if there's contact between 2 different points, and if you're lucky it will also report its battery level so you know how much battery is left in the device. But as I said, Switchbot usually pack extra features into their devices, so with their contact sensor, not only is it a contact sensor, but it also contains a motion sensor, a look sensor, and also a button. And what's cool about this contact sensor is any of those different sensors can be used to trigger different scenes and automations, and it can even work out if you're entering or leaving a room based on whether there's motion before or after the contact is broken. In a recent HomeAssistant update, Bluetooth received a massive overhaul, and thanks to that overhaul, we can now directly add some Switchbot devices directly to HomeAssistant, and this is all done locally, and you don't need any internet connection or any Switchbot hub in order to actually view and control these devices. Some of them you can add directly without even using the Switchbot app, but for most of the devices you will need to set them up using the Switchbot app in order to actually do the configuration for them. Let's take Switchbot's latest curtain robots for example. So these are Switchbot's second generation Switchbot curtains, and they're a lot more durable and rugged than the original design. We can set them up and pair them using the Switchbot app, and if you happen to be using a Bluetooth dongle or maybe your HomeAssistant instance has onboard Bluetooth, then you'll actually see a notification telling you that a new device has been discovered, and if you run through the setup of that device, it will actually activate the Switchbot integration for you, and it will bring those curtains directly into HomeAssistant. This setup is super simple, and the only prerequisite is that you need to already have the Bluetooth integration enabled, and if your HomeAssistant already has Bluetooth on board or you've got a dongle plugged in, then that should have automatically enabled itself and it should have already been working. If for whatever reason it's not there, you can go into your integrations and manually add Bluetooth and set that up first. If you're adding multiple devices or multiple curtains, you might need to know what the MAC address is for that specific device, and this MAC address is going to be its Bluetooth MAC address, and you can find this by going into the Switchbot settings and into the information about the device. This also applies for the Switchbot integration, so if your device isn't automatically discovered by HomeAssistant, you can just go into your integrations and manually add Switchbot, and then you should see any Switchbot devices that have been detected on your network. I've been using the curtains with this setup ever since that update came out, and for me personally it's been working flawlessly. You're able to open and control both of the curtains if you happen to be using multiple, and you're also able to view the light level as well as the battery level for those individual curtains. And as you'd expect, as this is a device in Home Assistant, you can of course combine it with your different scenes, scripts and automations. So for me, I have my curtains opening and closing at specific points of the day. And that brings us onto our second method for adding devices into Home Assistant. So what we're actually going to do now is we're going to create a little device that's going to be a bridge between Bluetooth and Wi-Fi so that we can access that information using Wi-Fi. And the way that we're going to do this is by making use of MQTT. So the information is going to get translated to an MQTT message, and then we're going to pick that up with our Home Assistant broker. There are a couple of other methods that you can use to get those unsupported Switchbot devices into Home Assistant, one of them being the Switchbot API. So you can set up some REST sensors and some REST calls, and you can actually get those devices and have them controllable and also readable in Home Assistant. The only issue with this is you're going to be tied to the Switchbot API, so that's a cloud integration, and there's also a limit to the number of API calls that you can make in a day. So back to our Bluetooth bridge. For this next step now, I am going to be assuming that you know what an MQTT broker is and that you do already have one set up, just because I'm not going to be covering that in this video. So if you know what those things are and you've got them set up, let's carry on. For this next part of the project, we're going to be using the Switchbot MQTT Bluetooth Low Energy ESP32 sketch that's been set up and created by DevWaves. So a massive shout out to him for actually setting up and creating all of this. If you are interested in a written guide, then there is one available on his GitHub repo, and I'll leave a link to that in the description below. As well as a bit of MQTT knowledge and the MQTT broker already set up, you're also going to need an ESP32 that also supports Bluetooth. And again, over at that GitHub repo, you'll find a list of some of the ESPs that have been tested and are working with this project. I'm going to be making use of the ESP WRoom32 just because I happen to have a few of these kicking about, but you can make use of some of the other popular ESP chips like the WeMOS D1 Mini or the Node MCU. First thing that we're going to need to do is to download and install the Arduino Studio, and this will work on both Mac and Windows. I happen to be using a Windows machine, but if you are using a Mac, you can just follow along with the exact same setup process. For me, I'm just going to go for this Windows download here, the Windows 7 and newer. Now that we've got the Arduino Studio installed, we're going to need to add a couple of libraries and actually add our board type, so let's go and do that now. So open up your newly installed Arduino Studio, and at the top left there, we're going to choose File, and then Preferences. Within that Preferences dialog box, you'll see an option here for additional board URLs, and what we're going to do here is we're just going to paste in a URL, which you'll also find in the description below. So just in front of that list there, we're going to paste that in, and then we're going to do a comma at the end. So what you should have is the newly pasted URL, followed by a comma, then the original URL that was already there. With that done, we can go ahead and select OK. That URL is going to tell Arduino Studio the different boards that we have access to, so let's have a look at those now. Along the top again, we're going to choose Tools, and we're going to go down to Board, and then we're going to select Boards Manager. In the search box now, if we start typing ESP, it should bring back a result here for ESP32, and in the bottom right corner of that option, if we just select Install, that should just start downloading all of the different ESP32 boards that it's aware of, and we can then start using them within the Arduino Studio. With that completed, we can just click Close on the Boards Manager. So now back at the top, if we select Tools and head to Board, you should now have this new option here for ESP32 Arduino, and in this list there'll be all of the different ESP32 boards that currently work with Arduino. As I mentioned, for this demo, I'm currently making use of the ESP WRoom32, so I'd need to select that in my list just here. But if you were making use of something like the WeMOS D1 Mini or any of these other types of boards, especially if they support Bluetooth, then you'd need to select that in your list here. So find the board that you're actually using and just select that in the list. To test that we can actually communicate with our ESP32, what we're going to have a go at doing is just writing a simple example to the board itself. So get your ESP32 and you just want to plug it into your machine now. Back in the Arduino Studio, we now need to tell the Studio which COM port we're using to actually communicate with our board. So head back into Tools, and towards the bottom you should see this option here for Port, and this will be a list of all the different serial ports, and you'll need to select the one that your board's connecting to. If you're not sure what COM port your ESP is connected to, a simple way to actually identify which one it is to just open up the Windows Device Manager without the board plugged into your machine. Without the board plugged in, you should have this section here for ports, and if you expand that, you'll see all of the current COM ports that are in use without you plugging anything in. And if you now plug in your ESP, you should see that list refresh and you'll have a different COM number there. So here in my example, mine's COM8 as all the other ones were previously there. Back in the Studio then, I'd select COM8, but if yours was COM6 or COM5 or whatever else it might be, you'd select your option there. Now let's have a go at that example bit of code just to check that we can actually write to our board. So at the top menu, we're going to select File. Then we want to scroll down to Examples, and we're going to go for a basic example. And the one that we're going to go for is just Blink, just because that's one of the easiest ones to use. With that selected, we can just maximize that. And with that open, this is going to be the actual sketch that we write to our board. Towards the bottom right there, you should see this white text, and in that text, you should be able to see the board that you've currently got selected, and that should be the board that we chose at the beginning. And then towards the end of that line, you should also see the COM port that it's currently trying to use. Because we're using an ESP32 and this sketch is designed for an Arduino board, we just need to modify this ever so slightly in order to get it to actually work. So just before the void setup here, we want to just paste in this line to define what this LED bulletin is. So paste that in to tell it what pin it's on, and then we're going to select upload. You should then see the sketch starts to compile, and underneath this here, you'll see a log for what's currently happening. So we can see it's currently connecting to our board, and it will then start writing that image to the board. Once you see that hard resetting via RTS pin, if you look down at your board, you should now be able to see a blue LED flashing on your ESP. If that's all working for you and you can see that blinking light, we can now move on to adding those libraries that the Switchbot sketch is going to need. There's going to be 5 libraries that we need to add to our studio in order to get the Switchbot sketch to work, and they're all listed here on DevWave's GitHub page. We're going to need to add each of these individually, so let's start by copying the first one. Back in the studio at the top, we're going to select Sketch. Then we're going to choose Include Library, and we're going to select Manage Libraries. That will then open up the Library Manager, and in this little box here, we're going to just need to paste what we've got in our clipboard. So let's do that now. With that pasted in, it should return the library, and in the bottom right corner there, you should see a little install button. As mine's already installed, I won't have that, but you'll need to repeat this process for each of those 5 different libraries. With this CRC32 library, make sure you select the one that's by Christopher Baker, as when you search for this one, it will return a bunch of different ones. Once you've got those 5 libraries added, that's going to be all the configuration that we need to do for the Arduino Studio, and we can now move on to modifying that Switchbot sketch. If we head on over to DevWave's GitHub repo, we'll see a folder here for Arduino IDE files, and if we just select that, we'll then see this .ini file which we're actually going to need to compile our Switchbot sketch, and if we just select this, we'll actually be able to see all of the code that's actually available in that sketch. Now there's a few ways that you can go about downloading this. You can just manually download the whole repo, or if you wanted to, you could just copy and paste all of the text for this raw file. Personally, the way that I like to just grab a singular file is just by making use of a tool called downgit. So copy the URL for this page and then head on over to downgit. If you've never seen or used downgit before, it's just a simple tool that allows you to download an individual file or a set of files just using a URL. So we're just going to paste that URL in here, and then we're going to select download. That will then just give us a zip file that's going to contain that .ini file, so save that somewhere that you have access to. And all you'll then need to do is just extract that file from the folder, and you'll end up with this nicely presented .ini file. We can then just double click this file and it will open up within our Arduino Studio. If you get this pop-up telling you it needs to be inside of a containing folder, then that's fine and you can just select OK. That will then just continue and it'll open up this Switchbot sketch. Okay, so we're very nearly there now. All we now need to do is just modify some of this config and then we're going to be good to go. In the Switchbot config here, you'll just need to scroll down until you get to this point here where it's going to ask you to enter your Wi-Fi settings. Next to each of these bits of config, it is handily commented, so if you're not sure what should go in there, then just read the little comments here. In this first bit here, we're just going to give our ESP a host name, and this is what it's going to be identifiable as on our network. We can then provide our SSID and our password for our Wi-Fi. Once you're done with those 3, we can move on to the MQTT settings, and the settings that we're going to need to apply here are the IP address for the broker. We're then going to need to provide a username and a password if you happen to be using authentication. If you're not, then you can just leave this empty. We can leave the MQTT port as the default port of 1883, and then if you want to here, you can modify the MQTT main topic. I'm just going to leave that as Switchbot. There are lots of bits of config that you can turn on and off in here, and lots of different settings that you can tweak. For now, we're just going to do the bare minimum. We're just going to get this thing connected to HomeAssistant and get our devices working. But if you are interested in having a play around with those, all of the bits of code there are all nicely documented thanks to DevWaves, so just go and have a read through some of those and turn them on and off or modify them to just have a play around with it. Once you're happy that your broker settings are correct, we can continue scrolling down, and this is where we're going to need to start configuring our devices. So for me, I'm going to be setting up a contact sensor, a motion sensor, and also the meter, so I'll need to modify the sections for those various points. The first one that I can see in this list here is the Switchbot and also the Switchbot curtains. As we're not going to be making use of the Switchbot bot or the Switchbot curtains, we can just skip over those. So the next one that's in that list there is the Switchbot meter. In here you'll find that all of the config is commented out. So what we'll need to do is we'll need to assign a name to the device and also supply the MAC address. To keep things simple, I'm just going to keep it with the default name, so I'm just going to leave it as meter1. For the Bluetooth MAC address, you can get this by opening up the Switchbot app and going into the device information. That will then show you the Bluetooth MAC address, and you'll just need to type that in place here. You can see that this is all grayed out now because it's actually commented out. So what we'll need to do is we'll just need to remove this comment line from here, and I'm just going to drag it there before the comma. Now you can see here we've got our device name and our MAC address, and you can see that they're outside of that comment. If we had another meter that we wanted to add, we would need to add that comma, as these are going to be comma separated. So for example, if we were using meter 2 there, we'd remove that comment there and we just have this little comma. And that would just look a little something like this. And if you wanted to add a third meter, again, you just add another comma and then you'd type out the next address. And that applies for all of these different devices here in this config. We're only using one, so let's go back to how it originally was. Continuing on a little bit, I've carried on and I've added the information here for one contact sensor and also one motion sensor. So for the purposes of this demo, I'm just going to be using those 3 devices, but that's everything that we now need to do for our config. So we can now just go ahead and actually flash this to our device. So with our ESP plugged in, we can just click this upload button. As this one is a slightly larger sketch than that Blink one that we originally uploaded, this one might take a couple of seconds longer or a couple of minutes depending on what kind of machine you're using, so just let that do its thing and wait for the message in the console at the bottom. Hopefully that will compile without any issues, but if you do have any problems with it actually uploading or compiling, they will be listed here in the console, so just check through them to see what they are. More than likely it'll be either a missing library or it'll be a bit of config that's accidentally been typed wrong. Maybe you've left a comma or there's a bit of config not typed correctly, so just double check that. If it did upload correctly, you can just unplug it from your machine and you can plug it into somewhere else, anywhere that you can get a 5V USB to actually power the ESP, so go ahead and do that. Once you plug it in, you should see both the red light and also the blue light starting to flash, letting you know that it's trying to connect to the Wi-Fi and it's also starting up. If we now head into HomeAssistant, we should actually be able to see those devices automatically in HomeAssistant, as the auto discovery will automatically pick them up and add them as devices to our broker. Here in my config, I can see those 3 devices that I added. So I've got the motion one, the contact one, and also the meter one. And if I was to select any of those, it would show me all the information that's available for those different devices. So here, for example, with the motion one, I can see its battery level, I can see the status of the LED, I can see if there's any motion happening, and you can see as I move my hand in front of the motion sensor there, that instantly changes to being detected. It's not as fast as Zigbee, but I would say it is nearly there. The majority of this information is only represented as sensors, and you can't do any two-way configuration. So if you wanted to change any of these, so for example with the motion sensor, if you wanted to turn that LED on, or you wanted to change the sense distance, you'd need to do that using the Switchbot app. The same with the contact sensor. We get a lot of different bits of sensor information, and we can utilize all of these things within our various different scripts and automations. Even though this whole setup process is a lot more hands-on and a bit of work to actually do, once it is set up, it is definitely better than the current Switchbot integration, so I would definitely recommend using this approach. I don't know if there are any plans to have that two-way configuration, so you can actually modify some of the settings here and have that actually update on the device. I don't even know if that's possible, but if it is, that would be cool to see in a future update. The last thing that I want to just quickly touch on is how to update this. So if you want to update the sketch that's actually on your ESP, all you'll need to do is just visit the ESP's hosted page, and you do this by either entering the IP address or the hostname of your ESP and then put .local at the end. That will then take you to this page, and from here you can just upload a brand new bin file. Let's wrap this up then, and we're going to finish with some energy saving automation ideas using those Switchbot products. Some potential simple energy saving automations that we could have are things like just turning off the lights if no motion is detected on the motion sensors. And because we're combining this with HomeAssistant, it doesn't necessarily have to be lights that are bound to the Switchbot ecosystem. We could turn off our Philips Hue lights, or we could turn off our Ajax lights, or we could turn off pretty much any other smart home manufactured lights that are all enabled within HomeAssistant. Another great one that I've actually personally been using is to do with the contact sensor. So on my way out of my office, if I press that button and then contact is broken, any devices or lights that are left on in the office will just automatically turn off. It doesn't all have to be about the lights either. If you're making use of those temperature sensors, you can have your heating automatically turn off when a temperature's at a certain point in a room. You could also do things like hook up your air conditioning or your fans to some smart plugs to have them automatically turn off if nobody's home, and this will also just help conserve some energy. If you're making use of the curtains and it's a hot day and the light levels are really bright, you could also do things like have the curtains automatically shut, and that's going to help block out the sunlight, which is going to stop heating up the room, and that way you won't need to have your air conditioners on or your fans on, because that room won't be as hot as it could be. And there we go guys, that's been a quick look at 2 different methods for getting our Switchbot devices into Home Assistant. In the future, it would be great to see Bluetooth expanded on a little bit more so that it was more reliable and we wouldn't have to do this extra workaround for setting up an ESP in order to get our Switchbot devices to work. It would be great if they just natively worked and you could just simply pair them as we did in the first example. Let me know in the comments below what energy saving automations you're making use of in your smart home, and while you're down there, if you did enjoy the video, don't forget to drop me a like, and if you're not already, hit that subscribe button and ding dong the notification bell. You'll then be alerted to any future video that I do. As always, a massive thank you to these awesome dudes. These awesome dudes are my Patreons. If you're interested in helping support my channel, which in turn allows me to create content like this, then you'll find a link to my Patreon in the description below. If you want to check out some devices that are created specifically to help save you energy and money, then go and check out this video just here. Or if you want to check out some of the other videos by the other smart home YouTubers, then check out this playlist just here. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.